So getting data on a map is one important aspect, but then making that data readable, being able to tell the story you want to tell really makes your map look professional and is a much higher, gives it a much higher value than just throwing up data. And so we're going to talk a lot about cartography and that visualization today. So we're going to start off with color. Color is the reflection and the scattering or the absorption of the electromagnetic radiation in that electromagnetic spectrum that's in the visible spectrum. And as you see, looking at this gray bar of the whole electromagnetic spectrum, that visible light is very small. Now, when we look at remote sensing data, we might be looking at this aspect of light, the infrared spectrum. But for the mapping and talking about cartography, we're going to just look at the visible spectrum. So one reason that the sky is blue, or the only reason that the sky is blue, is because that very short wavelength of blue light gets scattered high up in the atmosphere from very small atmospheric particles, and that's so we're seeing that scattering of blue wavelength. When we look at a red sunset, usually that's the scattering in the red aspect of the electromagnetic spectrum of the red wavelength, and usually that'll scatter on larger particles. Like we had a lot of smoke or dust in the air, you may get a much redder sunset, and we saw a lot of that this summer of 2017. So when we look at an apple, a red apple, what we're really seeing is that reflecting back of the red wavelengths of visible color, and the other wavelengths are being absorbed. We talk about color, black is the absence of color, white is the addition of all color. So color on a map is really important. We have an intuitive sense about what colors mean. Even if we're not really aware, we sometimes have a gut sense. We think about red as danger. Stop signs are red. Hunting gear is red. So color on a map can convey meaning. It can provide emphasis. And it's also really engaging. Using good colors will draw your reader in. I'm going to show you an example of a pretty ugly map that, you don't want to spend a lot of time looking at that map. So color is really, really important. Here's an example. It's not a beautiful map, but where that color is conveying meaning. So the red is the most dangerous countries in the world, and we don't know what criteria they use. That's not what we're really thinking about here. But being able to look at that that color and intuitively know that that's probably, has some high value, and it's probably a negative value. Here's a map. This was one of the winners of the Map of the Month competitions, and this is where red is being used as a way to provide emphasis. So rather than danger here, it's a very elegant looking map, and that red is showing vacant buildings in Sao Paulo that would be available for using for a social movement or homeless locations. And here is another map, kind of just to illustrate that aesthetics. It's a very nice looking color scheme. The blue and the brown are kind of complementary colors. They go well together. There's not a lot of colors being used. It's very pleasing to look at that. The blue indicates water. That's as you see in nature, that works very well. And I'm going to see if I can move this over because that is bugging me just a bit. Okay. So that it really is important which colors you choose. So when we talk about color, so we talked about choropleth mapping, choropleth maps having one hue, but different saturations of that hue. So the hue is that dominant color, red, green, blue, orange. It's the colors of the electromagnetic spectrum and the visible light, Roy G. Biv. And it is just kind of those solid formal colors when you think about color on the map. Whoops, sorry about that. And if I were to look at the hue, if I'm showing this blue, this is a solid blue with no red and no green added to it. It's just a pure blue in the most intense saturation of blue that can be added. The value means the reflectiveness, the lightness or darkness of that color. And so black would have a very low value, white would have a very high value. When we're talking about saturation, I took the word value, some books or texts will call that the chroma, but the saturation is kind of the intensity or the purity. So if we look at a choropleth map, here is one with one hue, but it has different saturations of color as you move from the high motor vehicle accident rate down to the low motor vehicle accident rate. One thing to note here is that the areas that have no data available are not just empty, but they have a gray color with no data. That's a common way to indicate your data value. Another way to indicate no data in your attribute table, you wouldn't want to have a 0 here because a 0 could mean no accidents. So what is common in an attribute table for no data is a -9 or a -99 or a -999, and that stands for pretty commonly a representation of no data. Now the reason you need to use that is an attribute table that's showing a numeric value cannot have the word no data in one of those records because then it wouldn't map correctly. So substituting a -99 for the no data is very common. And so then we can look at color having some general meaning. A lot of researchers, especially in advertising, if you want to find really good examples of colors that work together, you want to look at advertisers because they spend a lot of time on finding colors that would draw people in or speak to a certain group of people. So basically that, yellow is the, yellow-bellied, coward, dishonest, youthful. Red is action, cold, blue. Oceans are blue, water's blue. That can mean purity or serenity. It can also mean depression. Green for things in nature, immaturity, and black is probably the most powerful color you can put on a map. It can be mystery, heaviness, mourning. All of those tend to work together. They can have a positive or a negative impact on your map. There's been a lot of studies related to color preference, so that warm colors are kind of the red, orange, yellow. They're in the longer wavelength. Children like bright colors, kind of pure primary colors. I just found this preferences in North America, particularly the gender preference that women supposedly like red over blue and yellow over orange, and men are the opposite. And that's also from this Board and Dent study in 2009, 99? Yeah, maybe a little old, but interesting. One thing you want to avoid is using solid black. So when you look at black in your color keys, and we'll get to the scale in a minute, black is 000, and a black color of 000 is too intense. So the black in this map really takes over. I wish I had this data because it would be fun to do this map with different shades of gray for this road features in the back of these symbols, and you would see it would just brighten it up quite a bit. So black is really heavy. I recommend never using solid black on your map, and sadly ArcGIS Desktop defaults to solid black, and so you have to go in and change that if you want to adhere to that format. Whoops, I'm trying to find the mouse here.